Good morning. Thanks for coming so early to our talk. It's like 10 o'clock, right? You know, it's the last day in Vegas. My name's John. This is
Jimmy.
And we're here to spend a bit of time talking about some of the stuff that we announced here initially last year, which was, you know, our efforts to put dynamic languages into Silverlight, which is, you know, our team is building both Python and Ruby. A partner team of ours is building managed JScript, and you're going to see that in our talk as well today. And it's really kind of an update where we're at right now, where we're going, what's left to do. Some of our stuff, the Python and Ruby projects, are actually open source projects, so part of my job here is to see if there's anyone out there that wants to help us contribute to finishing all of this stuff as well. So, and that can be in one of two different ways, right? You know, you can either come work for us, or you can work for us as an open source contributor as well. So before we start, I thought that we should kind of like make some assumptions, right? About you guys in particular, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we think, right? It's all about you guys. So I'm going to assume that y'all like dynamic languages in some way, shape, or form, right? And certainly if you're doing web stuff, right, you're at least using that language up in the top left corner there. And the other thing that I'm going to assume is that you guys are pragmatic, right? And it's really all about getting stuff done. And to kind of help us celebrate this thing, I thought that what we could do is have a theme for our talk, right? And the theme really is all about freedom. Now, you're saying, but John, wait a second, right? You know, freedom, right? That sounds kind of hokey, right, for a technology talk. So I'm going to spend some time talking about what we're not talking about, right? We're not talking about what these guys are selling you. We're not talking about what these guys are selling you. We're not talking about what this guy is trying to sell you as well, right? But instead, or even that thing, right? It's really the freedom to create, right? Now, all of you guys in some way, shape, or form have helped to produce this crazy cloud thing. And the big part of why you were able to go off and build what looks like this thing today is largely due to this thing, right? This power law of participation, right? The idea is that there's very low barriers of entry to allow people to get in and participate in building the web. And a big chunk of that is due to the fact that it's really easy to build upon the work of other people, right? It's easy to build upon the work of other people if it was like open source stuff, and it's also easy to build upon the work of other people simply by seeing what they've done, right? You know, so view source has been very powerful in making this kind of stuff happen. Another thing is this freedom of choice thing, right? You want to be able to choose different things. Some of these choices are things that you make as a web developer. Some of the other choices are things ultimately that are made by your users. So certainly platforms, browsers, and languages, right, are things that you typically think about when you're building an application. Now, obviously, this is probably a choice that you're making and not necessarily what your customers are making. And also the choice of what tools that you want to use, right? So it's really challenging if, you know, what you're building is, hold on a second. If somebody from TSG could come up here and turn off the sound on that desktop machine that's really distracting. So what we also have is we also have a number of, you know, different tools that we can use, right? Be it a text editor, be it, you know, an integrated development environment like Visual Studio. You know, so you can adopt as little or as much of the stack, right, as you might want to adopt, right, when you're building your applications. Now, a big part of this is the freedom to see the source code, right, the source code for the things that other people have built upon. Now, I'm going to make this crazy assertion, right, that just, you know what, some source code just isn't all that interesting, right? And I would argue that the source code for this stuff and the source code for that stuff, as far as you're concerned as web developers, really isn't all that interesting, right? You know what? Some of that source code's available, right? Some of it isn't. But you know what? What's much more interesting is whether or not the source code for that stuff is available, right? Because that's the stuff that you touch on a daily basis, right? You know, so being able to build on top of open source languages and dynamic languages in particular, right, that use these kinds of frameworks is something that a lot of people do care about. Now, it's kind of weird to talk about, you know, open source and stuff like that, you know, as a Microsoft guy. It got an awful lot easier for me to talk about this stuff after October of last year. And after October of last year, effectively what happened was some of our licenses became real ratified open source licenses. Just yank the power, man.
I don't even know where
So, the Microsoft permissive or public license, right? It was a permissive license. It's now the public license. Was ratified. We had a lot of, the naysayers that talked about this initially, right? But certainly it's a lot easier for us to go off and build stuff, as open source, as real open source, now that this important step has happened. Another thing I want to talk to you about is the engine that our team is building, right? The engine behind all of this stuff is really the dynamic language runtime. Now, again, this is one of these things which may or may not be of interest to the folks in the room, but one of the nice things about the work that we've been doing is that our engine, the dynamic language runtime, is also an open source piece of software released under the Microsoft public license. So what that means for maybe not you guys, but for folks like Miguel over at Novell, is that those guys can simply take the DLR, right, and package it up and ship it. Right? They don't have to go off and reinvent the wheel. Right? So that kind of code sharing makes it a lot easier for progress to happen and for Silverlight to be able to run on other platforms as well. So our team is building 2 open source languages. One of them is Python. The other one is Ruby. Microsoft in general at large is building Silverlight. The folks over at Novell are building Moonlight. And ultimately what that allows you to do is pick, or at least allow your customers to have a choice, right, in what platform you can run your applications on. So, and also what browser, right? So those are also all of our supported browsers. So back to this pragmatic thing, right? Enough of this, philosophy lecture. Let's talk about how we can get things done and how really straightforward it is for us to go off and build things, using our integrated set of tools. So there's nothing better than Hello World, right? So right now what we'll do is we'll switch back over to the Mac over there. And Jimmy here will show you how to go off and build Hello World using our tool stack on top of the Mac. Take it away, Jimmy.
Thank you, John. Wow, I get to speak. That's pretty cool. I thought it was like Penn and Teller up here. I thought I was just going to be not speaking, and John was just going to run the show, but I actually get to talk. It's pretty cool. All right, so this is a Mac, right? This is not an APC, right? And we're going to show you a Silverlight 2 demo with dynamic languages. So we do support both platforms. And Miguel is helping support that other platform, right? Or support just all the other platforms that use Linux as a base. Right, so just a command line. This is all I'm going to use and a text editor to show you how to get things done. So the first part, try to make this really easy. Let's just make an app. Let's just generate an app. So anyone who's familiar at all with Rails kind of can
you do a Command
like
Shift
this.
plus on your machine, please?
Oh, to increase size?
Yeah, that's really hard to see.
I don't know if...
That's terminal, right? Command Shift plus.
OK. Yeah.
No?
No. Here, I'll increase the size. It's fine. Here, distract people.
So one of the experiences that we really wanted to make happen was the ability to run things directly out of the file system, right? You shouldn't need to have to install a web server in order to get stuff done. We also wanted the experience to be such that when you hit refresh inside of your browser, right, that immediately, right, you're going to see the changes that you just saved, right, inside of the text file in your file system reflected inside of your browser. So the nice thing about that is that you get this really nice kind of, flow. You get to stay in the flow for as much as possible, right? Type something, hit refresh, type something, hit refresh, right? With a minimal amount of time in between. There's all sorts of weird, spooky stuff that we'll talk about that's necessary to make stuff happen, which is why we went off and built Chiron in the first place, which is our name for our little local web server. So since we built this thing, this is what Jimmy's going to show you now, right? Which is our script server thing. Okay.
Right, so we have Chiron now is running on my local box, and it only runs locally, right? It's just for local development. But that little generate script I ran created this Hello World app. All right, so I'm going to click on that, and we don't do any magic to serve up the index file, so you actually have to run that. Right, but it runs and loads, and that's Ruby and Silverlight. Right, so this is Ruby running in your browser on Silverlight 2. So let's actually take a look at what this stuff looks like. Let's open up a new tab. this is again one of the editors we had on that window, right? A choice. So let's open up Hello World and let's just take a look at. Right, it's just an HTML page. The special part about it is that we point to this this zap file, right? Which we'll explain in a little bit, but essentially that points to this folder. Right, and in that folder, you've got app.rb, and that's what the app does. That's your script for starting. It says, I want to use XAML here, and we do some understanding and know you want to load app.xaml because your class is app, your file name is app. And then on initialize, because we actually created the class down here, we're going to set that some XAML element to be that text. Right? So very simple, right? And that's hello world.
So the bottom line, right, is we run this file.
Yep.
Right? So, so I'm still confused. What is this zap thing? Right? Actually, you guys all, who here doesn't know what a zap file is by Friday here at MIX? Right, we're going to do an acronym. Nobody's okay. There's enough people here. So the zap file is how we wind up distributing components, right, inside of Silverlight. Right? It's really just a zip file, right, which has been renamed. So perhaps what we could do is, let's open up ruby.zap in this case, right, so we can see what's inside of that file.
So just as a demonstration, if you have a folder in Chiron, you want to get the zap for it, click on the little Silverlight icon. All right, let's save it to disk since it's and then let's put it in a sane directory here. Let's put it on the desktop.
Command D? Yeah, you're there already.
Right, let's put it in hello world.
You're trying to choose a helper application, dude.
Oh, yeah, what the hell is that? Forget this, I'm just saving it.
Yeah, click on open.
Right, so let's find that ruby.zap file. Right, let's rename it to zip so we can actually open it and see what it does. I'm sure I want to use zip. Let's open it. All right, so it extracted it to this directory. And what's in here?
So you can see there's a bunch of stuff, right? Not only do we have the stuff that was originally inside of our app directory, or sorry, our Ruby directory, right, which is the app.rb, app.xaml, and app.manifest.xaml. But what we also have is all that other scary-looking stuff, right, a bunch of DLLs, right? So those assemblies are the pieces that we need to run Ruby inside of the browser. So one of those things, Microsoft.scripting.dll is the DLR. Microsoft.scripting.silverlight.dll is our shim, right, which allows us to connect our world, right, to the Silverlight world.
That's my fault. So yeah.
Yeah, that's all Jimmy's fault. And Iron Ruby and IronRuby.libraries obviously is the implementation of our language. Right, so the cool thing about what Chiron does for you, right, is you don't have to worry about the details of packaging this stuff up. What it does is it does this called dynamic zapping, right? And what dynamic zapping is all about is looking at the contents of the directory that you've pointed to and finding out all of the union of all the languages that are being used. And then given that, make sure to go off and grovel through the world, right? There's secret stuff about how it finds those assemblies and drops them into the zap for you. Right, so it's a very nice, convenient tool, right, for you to use to go off and build your applications.
Yeah. For development, right? For production, you don't want to use this server, right? You just want to zap it and throw it up there. Chiron will let you do that too, but for local development, you don't want to keep, having this build step, right? It's dynamic language. The point is not to have a build step. So this is what it gives you. But the other nice little point here is Chiron has an option whether to stuff it in the zap or not. Right? So if you're thinking, well, I don't want to download all these files every time I download my zap, that's an option. It's just we're showing the basic simple case. Let's just throw everything in it, show it work. Right? So.
And we'll also see static zapping later on in this talk.
Okay. All right, so you want me to do anything to this?
Yeah, let's make it do something, right? Just to prove that something happened here, right?
Let's show that it edits.
Imagine.
Right? So let's add an event, right? So message. What do you think?
Mouse left button down. That lovely name. Yeah, do center and args. Yeah, sure.
And we'll do.
And then let's just change the message, right? So message.text, right, is whatever, right? Clicked me. Hello. Ouch. Sure.
All right, so I save it. And
let's
I
go back and
over
refresh.
to my browser. I'm still running Chiron, am I? I want to make sure.
Go to the other tab.
Still running it.
Uh-huh.
Let's reload it. Right?
Woohoo! So. Yay! Our one and only demo work. No, we've got more demos. Just kidding. So there's something also that's really kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys noticed that. if you go back to, can you go back to your terminal window? And if you look at, you know, the top thing there, what the tab says, maybe you can zoom in by doing the little fancy thing you can do on Macs.
Oh, yeah.
You know the fancy thing you do on Macs, right? You know, the double finger control, you know, scroll thing?
There's something. Yeah, I don't remember.
Do
you know it? Hey, there you go.
Right?
So everyone can read that, right?
Now you can read it, right? So the cool thing about what happened is Chiron, right? This little local web server that does magic stuff, right, is a managed application, right? It just uses the system.net stuff, right? And so the cool thing is we were able to run this thing completely unmodified, right, on a Mac under Mono, right? Because this is something that's not inside the browser. So if you wanted to run stuff in Silverlight today, of course, right, everything has to run in the browser, right? With the stuff that we're building. But the nice thing is you've also got Mono, so this whole development experience just happens, right, with Mono on top of the Mac, right? And obviously this could be a Linux box or whatever you want as well, right? This stuff all just works.
Just ignore that malloc thing over there. That's What did you do?
There you go.
Thank you.
All right.
Cool.
So we all done? Let's go back to slides.
Yeah, this is done.
All right. So what do we see? We saw, so that's the official logo for Chiron, just in case. So if you're wondering, you know, what on earth is Chiron? It's kind of hard to see Chiron. But Chiron is one of these little kind of like pseudo-planet things, right, that's inside of our solar system, right? So that's the official logo for Chiron, right, which is that's actually the orbital path of Chiron. You know, we saw some editing, right, inside of, well, maybe not that text editor. We were originally going to do this somewhere else, right? But on TextMate, you were able to use Ruby, and of course, we're using Silverlight there, right, inside of the browser. So that's pretty cool, right? Because essentially, we're probably using perhaps, you know, a lot of the tools that you're still using today. Whatever your favorite text editor is, you're just editing files, right? There's no adoption of this big complicated thing, right? Just to build something relatively straightforward. Later on in this talk, we're going to go off and see how we can go off and, you know, use more stuff out of the stack. So this zap thing is important enough that I just wanted to say one more time. So the idea really is, oh, this is all changed at the last minute too. Oh, okay. So we can scratch the Silverlight.js now, right?
Oh, that's right.
You know, so right now all we have is index.html, right? We're going to look at this in the next part of the talk, but you'll see that before, if you've been doing Silverlight stuff before, right? You had this Silverlight.js helper file that would go off and generate the object tag and a bunch of other stuff for you. Instead, we can just now drop in the object tag straight into your HTML page without needing the helper file, which is goodness, right? It's nice to simplify what this model looks like. So index.html and the object tag ultimately points to app.zap. Right? Inside of app.zap, there are two scenarios. One scenario is a case where app manifest.xaml, right, you know, contains pointers to stuff inside of this file, and the rest of the stuff, that is, you know, the dynamic Silverlight assemblies and your language assemblies, those things all come from somewhere else. And ultimately, this is the way you're likely going to be deploying this stuff. Right? Whereas your app.zap is going to be relatively small, a couple of K maybe, right? Depending on how much stuff you've actually got in app.rb and app.xaml and what other stuff you're using inside of your app. And then everything else comes from somewhere else. Now, obviously, in the simple case, you could also just stuff everything into your, you know, your app directory, right? And everything comes down as part of that XAML, right? So you got some choices there. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is, you know, scenarios where there's existing code out there, right? One of the nice things about this view source idea, right, is that we can go off and take some existing code from somewhere else, right, and just plop it into our application, right? You know, so this ability to reuse stuff is just awesome. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, how we're going to go off and do this part of the lab. So Jimmy, let's, we're in the right place. Hit escape.
Oh yeah, you're right. Duh.
All right. Don't show them the secret slides that are coming next. Don't look. Okay. All right. So if we go,
let's
yeah,
get
hit
out of
enter.
here.
Right.
Where am I? There we go.
Okay. So let's go back up to the Flickr app. So go to Flickr end. Yeah. No, Flickr end.
Yep.
Right. And let's go chd/b there. That's our shortcut. Typing Chiron is just way too long. Okay. And if you click on index, let's show them what the finished application does first. Right, and then we'll figure out how this thing works. So this application, right, actually we should have shown them start. Okay, yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. What this application does is given some search term, right, so let's type the name of your favorite animal.
Meow.
So what this app does is, given that search term, it will go off to Flickr, right? So it does a cross-domain REST call, right, over to Flickr, sends a text, gets some JSON back, right, from Flickr, grovels through the JSON, pulls out the URLs by doing that complicated thing that you always got to do with Flickr, right, and then injects some additional UI into the page, into the existing scene on the page. And that UI will go off, retrieve each one of those pictures, right, that were brought back, and then pop the animation effect, at that point, right? So it's a pretty straightforward application in terms of what it does, right? But it does show an awful lot of interesting things that you're likely going to run into virtually right away, right, when you're trying to build stuff using this stack. By the way, I just posted blog entries for each one of the demos in kind of excruciating detail, right? Up on my blog, which is if you just, search for my name, right? John Lamb, you'll find out what it is. And you can follow through this stuff at home. It's fully our intention that after this talk is over, I don't know if John Messerly is in here, but if John isn't in here, it's good because he's packaging up our stuff, right, to ship to you guys, once our talk is done. So, so the other thing I want to show you about the finished part of the application is let's search for house. And as you can see, Jimmy can't spell all that well, right? But what's kind of cool about this is that we have this spelling checking thing happening, right? So it did this auto suggest thing, right? And you notice that there was this weird delay, right? And that's why I wanted to show you guys app.start first, or the start part of the Flickr thing, because it would have booted a lot faster. The reason why it was booting kind of slow is that because it was training itself, right, with a 1 million word dictionary, right, to learn about different possible deltas on spelling, right? So this is a very naive spell checker, which is trained by reading a corpus of text, right? But the cool thing is you can see that we can just use that code, right? So let's go off and see where on the internet we can go off and find a 25-line naive spell checker written entirely in Python. Now remember, right, this is a JavaScript application that you have inside of the browser.
So what should I search for?
So you should search for Norvig, N-O-R-V-I-G, and spell. That's probably all you need. These search engines are awesome today, right? Spell, yeah, second, yeah, first point. Yeah,
is it the first one?
Yeah, where'd it go? No, okay, there you go.
Where
spell
is it?
Checker. Oh, you're spelling Norvig wrong.
N-O-R. Hey, I warned you, I couldn't spell, right?
Apparently search isn't all that good yet, right? Okay, there, you've got to get the guy's name right. So if you look down here, you'll see that that in its entirety, scroll down like a little bit, there you go, right? That is an entire spell checker written entirely inside of Python. Now the idea is, you should really read this. I highly recommend that you read this paper, it's awesome. Right? But the idea really is it looks for the edit distance, which is a number of changes between the word that it sees versus the words that it knows about in its corpus that it trained itself against. Right? It's a fascinating thing. Right? But I think it's pretty cool that this thing was able to, in a span of about 3 seconds or so, right, train itself against a 1 million word dictionary, which is about 6.5 megs worth of text. Right? Given that, and then go off and do the other stuff for you as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially show how relatively straightforward it is to integrate that piece of software that we just found by searching the internet, right, into an existing Silverlight application which uses managed.js. Okay? So let's go back into file system, and let's go into app, and let's open app.js. All right, so lots of scary looking stuff at the top. Right, let's go to the bottom, right? The bottom's much less scary. All right, so virtually right at the top here, right, the thing that I want to show you is, we've got this file open. Let's go and open spell.py just to show that it's actually here. Okay? Right, so there's our spelling checker, right? We've already put this inside of our directory, right? But if you look through, just get to the bottom here, right? You'll see that this is the Peter Norvig spell checker, right? We haven't changed anything. In fact, one of the key goals of this talk was to avoid completely, right, changing anything, inside of this thing. Obviously, you can change this, right? But it's more impactful, right, if you don't change a thing at all. So let's go back to app.js. And if you go to the bottom, right, the first thing we should look at is load spell checker, right? So that's load spell checker, you can see there's a load module that's in there. And what happens is, when you call load module, it looks for another module inside of your zap that has the same name. Right? So in this case, it's spelled out py. We can omit the file name extension in this case. It loads that module, assigns it to this thing called engine, right? Which is essentially just a reference to that module, right, that we loaded. And then there is engine.correct. So can you open up another tab so we can go back and forth between spell.py and this? And search for correct in there?
Well, that's not going to help.
Okay, so we're going to call that function, right? That's exactly what happens there, right? That's the thing that initiates the spell checking thing inside of Python. So we go back to app.js, right? You'll see that in the next thing, which is a spell check function, we'll say the suggestion there, that line there, var suggestion is equal to this.correct, right? You see that there? Right, so that's all we're doing, right? We get the suggestion back and we do some scary XAML stuff, right? Okay? And stuff comes out. Right? So that's all you had to do. Right? Literally, it's like 3 lines of code there, right? To go off and take some Python code from the web or any other code, right? Integrate it into this thing and have it just work. Right? So that's a very cool kind of thing that we can do using this example. Now, some of the other things I want to show you in this sample are around some of the sharp edges that you might run into, right? Today, we're going to fix a lot of these things before we're done, right? But let me show you, in particular, how we do JSON serialization. Now, what's interesting about this application is the fact that this is JavaScript, right? So, you know, worst case, right, you can just eval this. Only crazy people do that, but you could do that, right? You can eval the JSON you get back. Or you go off and use some off-the-shelf JSON library, right, that you can use to go off and parse the results. Now, there is also a JSON serialization library inside of the .NET framework. So if you're in JavaScript, it's pretty easy to do this stuff. In Ruby today, we couldn't easily go off and just use an existing Ruby JSON serializer because we're not done on the language yet. So, you know, when this application was already written, we were going to go off and use the built-in JSON serializer, right, inside of Silverlight. Now, if you start using the built-in JSON serializer inside of Silverlight, while I'm talking, maybe you can go off and open contract.cs. You'll find that, you know, the JSON serializer is really designed to be used. Like, JSON is this dynamic thing, right? It's JavaScript. So, you know, we're trying to consume it from a statically typed language, right, which is a C# or a VB. Right? That's one of the key scenarios, right, for Silverlight. Now, given that, I think it's really important. It's inside of lib. Yeah. So given that, we need to somehow describe to, you know, to the JSON serializer, right? Imagine that we're C# or VB, right? What the shape of the JSON that's coming back is. And so the way we can describe the shape of the JSON, right, is by essentially defining some types, right? Because this is how we do things in C#. So we're going to define a few types, and given that set of types, once we've got the definition for this stuff, and we get the JSON, we hand it to the JSON serializer, it comes back, I can now dot into things, right? You know, and if we're programming in Visual Studio and all that stuff, we'll see that later, right? You can hit dot, and IntelliSense shows up, and you get all that goodness in there as well, right? You know, so that's a nice thing to have. So really, what we had to do was essentially construct this assembly, right? It's just a token assembly. All it has is the definitions of these types, right? There's no code at all inside this assembly. And we're also going to go off and use and consume this thing from within our application, right? So let's see how we wind up consuming this thing. If we go back to the JS file, are we wedged?
No, we're not. I'm just dumb.
Okay. So, so if you just search for JSON in there somewhere in this file, there's something. There it is. Okay. So you'll see that var ds is equal to new data contract JSON serializer. Say that 10 times fast. And query results over there is that type. Query results is a type that came out of contract.dll, which was also downloaded. Right. This is a C# assembly that was downloaded inside of the Zap along with everything else, right, inside of your app. So the cool thing is, now that we've got this thing, we can go, you know, ds.readObject stream there, right? So inside this function, somebody hands us a stream. When I read this thing and it comes back out, result is going to be the strongly typed thing, right, if we were in C#, right? And since it is just a CLR type on the other side, we can dot into it from manage.js, right, because manage.js knows how to talk to CLR types. Right, so if we go down a little bit further, right, you can see that we go var photos is equal to result, right, that initial result of the thing, dot results, dot photos, right? And given that, we can start iterating over photos, so there's photos at I there. And if we show them, if we just go up a little bit, you see get photo URL up there. And inside of get photo URL, we are actually dotting into the individual fields, right, inside of an individual photo result, right, that came back from Flickr. Right? So it's kind of nice, right? We can just simply dot into things, right, you know, to go off and retrieve the properties inside of JSON as well. Right? So that's pretty cool. So that part is nice because it shows you how you can take some arbitrary C# assembly, right, and drop it into your existing, you know, JavaScript app, right? So we've really got 3 languages inside of this thing, if you think about it, right? We've got some C#, we've got some managed.js inside of this sample, and we've also got some Python inside of this example, all kind of wrapped up in an application that just works, right? So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Anything else I should? Oh, yeah. No. Okay. So let's go back to slides. Shift F5.
Man, you like hide everything.
Shift F5.
You love that.
Thank you. So what did we see? We saw some JavaScript. We saw some Silverlight. We saw some Python inside of this example. And we saw a little bit of C# inside of this example as well, right? So it's this nice ability to mash together at least 3 different languages in order to get something to happen. And by the way, the source code for all of this stuff is available on my blog as well. So the last part that I want to talk about in our demo parts is this idea about adopting only what you need, right? So up until now, we've had a fairly, you know, we haven't had to change things. If I was a web developer already editing things in, you know, my text editor of choice and using open source frameworks, you know, I'm not using an IDE, right? You know, but some of the cool things you can get with an IDE are also useful as well, right? You know, if that's the route that you want to go down. So in this part of the demo, what I want to show is how you can take some Silverlight code, and given that Silverlight code, you can also integrate it into an existing ASP.NET MVC application, right? So we can see some ASP.NET MVC on the server, right? Some Silverlight happening down on the client, and we'll go through the kind of steps and the goo that you need to do today in order to make that happen, right? So you can go home and have a good out-of-box experience there. So let's go to MVC end. Right? And let's just open up the solution, MVC application.sln. There we go. So when I built this application, we start off, just keep the Solution Explorer up and pin it for a sec.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So once we've done that, right, you can see that there's a bunch of different things that we had to add to it. So if you've seen an existing ASP.NET MVC application already, this directory layout should look reasonably familiar to you right now. Right? So there's a bunch of things that we have, you know, your controllers and your views and your models and that kind of stuff. Those are things that should be familiar to you already. Now, some of the weird stuff or the new stuff is the fact that we've got this app directory up there as well. Right? So the app directory simply contains all of our Silverlight stuff. You can call it whatever you want, right? We also added assets as well, but assets just contains a style sheet that we use to give you kind of pretty formatted error messages. You know, should your code inside of, you know, not that you guys write bugs or anything, right? But you know, should your code ever crash or anything inside the browser, it's going to give you a much, you know, nicer experience and a stack trace and some other things, right? So that's what's inside of assets. Now, there's an important distinction here now, right? Because now you're living inside of Visual Studio and there's a project system and things compile and there's a bunch of stuff that has to happen. So what I want to do is I want to show you some of the things that you need to modify an existing ASP.NET MVC application in order to kind of get into this I build stuff before I run it model, right, which is how this world works. And we're also using the ASP.NET development server as well in order to make all this stuff happen, right? So somehow we have to integrate. We're not using Chiron anymore, right? So we're going to use Chiron but in a different mode. So Jimmy, if you can just right-click on MVC application.
Oh, yeah, project, sure.
And go to Properties. Go to Build Events. You'll notice there that there's this post-build event command line there. Right? And that's where we're going to go off and run chiron.exe. Right? So there's this little thing that you have to add in there. You know, that exact snippet sitting on my blog, so you just copy and paste it in your app. And so the nice thing about that is, you know, when you do a build, after the build is complete and successful in this case, what it does is it runs Chiron over a directory and manually generates the zap file for you. right, and drops that back into your application, right? So the weird thing about programming, so I really like the Chiron experience where you're just in the file system because I can just change a file and hit refresh in the browser and magic just happens. So unfortunately, there's another layer of indirection in here that happens, so we don't have that same experience. So don't forget to build, right? So that's the trick. The other thing I want to show you is the fact that what's cool about what we've got working now is we've got debugging working, right? So in order to get debugging working, there's a couple little bits of spooky magic that you got to do, but it's not all that spooky. Go to web and scroll to the bottom and to the right.
Tonk.
Right? And you'll see that there's this Silverlight thing, and just scroll back to the left so you can see what the context is, which is debuggers, right? So if you have the Silverlight tools for Visual Studio installed, right, in that big giant pile of stuff that we just shipped a couple of days ago, if you have that stuff installed on your machine, then you're going to get that little checkbox showing up inside of Visual Studio. Make sure you turn that thing on, right, in order to get debugging to work inside of your app. Now, another thing I want to show you is, let's go to index.aspx, right, inside of Views Home. And let's scroll down a little bit. The other little bit of magic is debug equals true. So Jimmy, can you highlight that, please? There we go. So without that, nothing's going to happen, right? So don't forget to add that. Depending on whose sample you're going to copy and paste from, right, you may or may not have that attribute sitting in there. But that's a little piece of magic, right, that tells us to emit debug information on the client when we're doing our code generation stuff, okay? So once you've got debug equals true there, we should just be able to debug stuff, right? So big drum roll, right? So let's see if we can go off and deep. So open up app.rb. Go down to the bottom. And,
where do you want to go?
Just drop a breakpoint in spellcheck.new on that line. Or, it doesn't matter where. Just, you choose. Okay.
There you go.
Right. Now do a build, because I got to make sure this thing is built first, right? I'm going to do a build, run this thing. The development server starts off. We're now training our dictionary right now. We're jitting a bunch of stuff, and boom, right there we go. We're sitting inside of that debugger.
There was another breakpoint.
Right. Oh, there's another breakpoint there? That's fine. Who cares? The point is, we're sitting inside the debugger. Now, as you can see, we're not done yet, right, in our debugging support, right? Because it shouldn't look that scary, right?
That's why I kept the font small. You don't want to see it.
So we still have some work to do, but the idea is, right, we can do this stuff, right? There's a bunch of other things that we still have to do in order to finish off our debugging support. But the key thing is, you can set breakpoints, it will stop, you can inspect locals, right? Which is a heck of a lot better than not being able to do that, right? And you can make that happen inside of all our languages, right? So debugging support in Python is much better than it is in Ruby right now because we're still lagging behind those guys. But we're going to get there shortly in a matter of weeks, right, to finish off our debugging support for Ruby. So, so that's not bad, right? We can go off and do things and just hit F5 to keep running. So they can see the rest of the app run. Oops, yeah, let's go back. Whoa, whoa. Ah, there we go.
Yep.
Right, so let's, find an animal, cat or something, I don't know, cow. Right, and you see it's exactly the same application and it just runs. Right, so it's pretty nice that we have this kind of integration that goes back and forth between the two pieces. So we started off with an MVC application, right, that didn't do an awful lot, right, still doesn't do a lot when we're done with it. But we've now been able to embed our Silverlight application, our dynamic Silverlight application inside of the existing MVC application. And now that we've got that to work, let's add some features, right? Let's make it so that this thing can, do something interesting, right? So the thing we want to do is, click on that first or second cow picture, right? Right? So if you click on that, you'll see it said add it to favorites, right? You can see my awesome UI skills up there, right? And so once we've got that, click on favorites up there now. So the idea really is that this thing, we're sitting in the debugger, right? Yeah, you can turn that thing off. Right, just did the refresh, and it just saves a bunch of favorites, right? So it's a really simple app, right? It just remembers the URLs for a bunch of photos that you want to call your favorite photos. So given that, let's kind of figure out, and let's take a look at the little bits and pieces of code that we had to write in order to make this thing happen. Right, so let's stop debugging. Shift F5.
Yep.
Right. So now that we're back inside this application, the first place to probably look is, let's go look at homecontroller.cs. So inside of homecontroller.cs, when you make a request to an ASP.NET MVC application, right, this is the thing that kind of has the first crack at stuff. Right? And you can see that when we hit index, which was our first thing up there, all index does is render the view, right? And remember, inside of index.aspx, we just had the code that generated that object tag, right? And given that object tag, we schlepped the stuff down to the client. Now, you'll notice that the next method there is called add, right? Inside of the add method inside of our controller, that's the code that, when we get a post back that comes, from the client, which is really just a REST-style GET request with the URL as a parameter as part of the URL in the query string. It comes in, there's a query there, and we simply tack it onto a list of strings, right, that we are stuffing inside of session in this case, right, to store all of those references. And you'll see that later on there's this favorites thing down there, and all favorites does is, given that string, right, given that set of URLs that we've saved as our favorites for this user, right, we're going to pull those things back out, turn it into a semicolon separated set of URLs, and we're going to send that back to the client somehow. The way we send it back to the client first is by writing it to this thing called view data so we can access that thing from our view. And if we go over and switch over to favorites.aspx, and we scroll down a bit, you'll see that there's that view data URLs thing. You just highlight that. It's kind of hard to, yeah, there it is. Awesome. All right, so view data URLs, shows up there, and that's how we inject the string in there. Notice that the string is injected into init params. Right, so given the fact that there's an init param sitting there, let's take a look at the code that will read that. So let's go to app.rb. You'll see that the very first conditional statement inside of initialize, right, that's a constructor for the app class. In that first thing, we go and we see whether or not there's a key called URLs, right, that was passed as part of our init params collection. And if there is, then we know, okay, we're going to render this thing in this, favorites mode instead. And all we do is, let's look at inject photos, favorite photos list. Right, so in there, we're just splitting the string and walking through the loop and doing a bunch of stuff. Okay, the stuff is interesting. We'll get to that in a moment, right? But we're just going to go through and inject each one of the photos inside there as well. Right, so it's a pretty simple app, right? It doesn't really do an awful lot. If we kind of go down a little bit to where we're building this thing, down a little bit further. Go up to the top.
Where you build it,
it's up
at the top. Yeah, here.
Right. So go down. Down.
Whoa.
Down. There, stop.
There you go.
Okay, so you've got this crazy localhost thing, right, that's there. So that's how we're doing our postback. You just scroll to the right there or get rid of the Solution Explorer. We don't need that thing.
Yeah, that's gone. Bye-bye.
And so all we're doing is taking the URL and we're doing this postback. So it's that nice kind of clean URL thing with add, and then the scary looking thing is, injected into the string, right? So we're just sending the URL back to the server there. Right, so again, really straightforward, very simple application. Now, the part that I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about is kind of the delta or the difference between that JS thing that we were running before, right, in the part 2 of our demos, or second part of our demos, and what we have inside of Ruby. So if we can just bring up that JS file again, if you just pop up Vim there.
Sure.
You've already got it open.
Do I?
Yeah, it's in the taskbar. One of these days I can just do the point thing, right, and stuff will happen, right? So down there?
It's not. There it goes.
Yeah, there it is. So inside of app.js, go to the top. So GG.
Yeah.
Control F. So almost like I want to use you, like as a keyboard, right? I'm giving you the keystrokes to type. Okay. So
I feel very used.
So we've got this this scary looking thing here, right, inside of our managed.js sample. So all we have is this big string thing, right? And if you've done some Silverlight 1 programming, right, this is kind of how you had to do things, right? The programming model in Silverlight 1 was really one where, you're going to be generating these element trees, by taking some XAML and parsing it, right, and injecting things to modify your stream, right? You can do things other ways, but it was kind of painful and wasn't really, a clean thing for you to do. So that's exactly how this sample works, is we're generating some XAML as a string. We're going to feed it to XAMLreader.load, which will generate the element tree in memory. Then we're going to tack it or inject it into our scene, right, when we're done. So that's how it worked inside of the JS app. Now, no, before you go back, the other thing I want to show is the part where we load this stuff. So if you go down a little bit further.
Function name?
Keep going, keep going, keep going. I'm paging stuff out of my memory. So go up. It's the part where we wind up loading the thing. So search for bitmap.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a good one. Great.
Capital B. Oh, no, they don't do it here. Yeah, sorry. Web client. I think it's web client.
What do you want to look for?
Web client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was right there.
There's several, so keep going. Yes, right there. So this is kind of freaky, right? So in here, right, we've got this web client thing. We're going to go off, and the path here is the path to the photo, right, the URI to the photo itself. Okay? And so when we kind of ported this thing over to JavaScript, because this was originally in Ruby, there's this weird, horrible thing that we're doing right here, right? And what we're doing is up above, right, somewhere in that scary bunch of XAML, we've got an image element, right? And inside of the image element, for the source property of this image element, we gave it the URI to go find the photo, right? So the XAML, when it's injected into the page, right, is going to go off and execute that code, right? And it's going to go off and start displaying, downloading the picture. The problem is, I want to wait until the picture is loaded, right? In other words, the download is completed before I inject the new element, right, into the scene. You know, guys all get that, right? Because otherwise the animation will fly off first, right, and then the picture pops in later, which just looks stupid, right? So you don't want to do that. So the grotesque hack is I load it again here, right? Wait until the load is done there before I inject it into, the scene, right? Which is horrible, right? But if you are programming this way, this is kind of the way you have to do it, right? Because there's no easy way of kind of composing this stuff later on after the fact. So let's go back to Ruby. Let's see how we can do this in a very nice and clean fashion inside of Ruby. So we go to the top here, right? You'll see that inside of this function there, we've got wpf.build there, and we're building this first chunk of code there for @canvas. That is the WPF for a photo and the image inside of it. So really the frame around the photo, and we just schlep a photo and slap it on top of that thing. So what's kind of nice about this thing is this is all done entirely inside of Ruby. Right? So this is programmatically creating the tree at runtime instead of kind of like here's a string and we're going to feed it to a XAML parser to do that job for us. Now, if you choose to go off and build things programmatically, it's much more painful to do it this way. The reason why it's painful is because the XAML parser does a lot of stuff for you, right? It does all of these type conversions, which are the parts that really are particularly painful inside of this thing. So if you look, for example, at render transform origin, right, you'll see that I'm passing in a Ruby array there, right? So it's 0.5, 0.5, right? Obviously, well, that has to be, I can't pass a Ruby array, right, to some .NET code, right? So some kind of transformation thing has to happen, in order to make this thing work. So if you open up Silverlight.rb.
I'm going to do it with them.
Right? So go back to, you can open up in whatever you want. So cd app. So Silverlight.rb. And let's just search for render/render. Yeah, there it is. So you can see there's a UI element there, right? That's a class. And one of the really interesting things that we can do in Ruby, and this is the technical term is called monkey patching. We can monkey patch stuff, right? So I can walk up to existing types and I can add additional functionality or change existing functionality inside of those types. So that's UI element, and UI element is the type where the render transform property is introduced in the type hierarchy, right, of WPF. Right? So by adding this one function there, render transform, it takes this point thing, right? What it does is, well, there's not a lot of error checking here, but it's an array. Well, if it is an array. What we'll do is we'll take point.first and point.last, right? We'll dot into the Ruby array, grab the first and the last element, okay? And we're generating a new point and assigning it into old render transform origin, right? So I've intercepted the call, right, to render transform origin, right? Replaced it with my own thing, right, and dropped it in back the other side, right? So it's pretty awesome, right? This is a very nice way for me to add all this kind of type conversion functionality, back in. And if you look through Silverlight.rb, there's tons of stuff in there, right, to do all these type conversions. So I can specify colors just by naming them instead of having to do the scary thing for programmatically creating a color. and the rest of that. So, I fully expect that this is something that I want folks, you guys, right, to start hacking on and start building that out, right? I basically only built enough to run this demo, but there's all sorts of other little type conversion-y things that can and should be done, right? And so I can imagine Silverlight.rb growing quite a bit. Right now it's 280 lines or something like that of Ruby code today, right? But we'll fill it out and we'll get all the things that we need to make it a really nice experience building this stuff. So let's go back to app.rb again.
App.rb.
App.
There
That
you
one,
go.
yeah.
I like that.
So if we scroll down a little bit, like one screen or two screens, Control F. Okay. So down a little bit more.
Oh, this part.
Okay, stop. All right. So you can notice there that we have this client equals web client.new thing up there, right? So what we can now do, right, is, okay, yeah. So you notice up here just above source gets set to bitmap. I new up a bitmap object and I stuff it into this XAML node, right, that I've just created, right, or this WPF node that I just created. But that's not bound to anything yet. And in fact, it's not even bound to the scene yet, right? So I've just got this chunk of WPF, right, this disembodied WPF floating around in space. And then what I do is I go off and I start my download, right? So open read async, right, is the way I start a download. When open read async, once the download has completed, it fires an event, which is open read completed, right? And args.result that comes back from that, right, is simply a .NET stream, right? So that stream object, I can now go off and call the set source prop or method, right, on the bitmap object, and it will load itself or initialize itself from the stream that contains the actual binary data, right, for the bitmap or the image that we downloaded, okay? And then we can shoot the canvas into the collection, right? So it just goes into our photos collection. So we get that nice effect, right? The image downloads first, then we pop the animation, right? So that's a nice thing for us to be able to do. And then here we've just got some other code there, which kind of finishes off our application here, right? Our MVC application. Remember, what we do is we click on something, right? And it goes off and sends this post back up to the server, right? So notice that for the canvas for each photo, mouse left button down is right there, right? And given mouse left button down, we set the text, we do some regex stuff to strip off HTTP and some other scary stuff, and then we send it back up to the server. Right, so it's a really simple thing that we can do. There's some really cool Ruby things. So if you're a JavaScript programmer, you all know about closures, right? Because closures are so useful, right, inside of JavaScript. If you're a C# programmer, you may or may not be using this feature, right, depending on where you're at. But the cool thing that I wanted to point out here is in open read completed, right, the event or this block, right, that we're using to handle this. What you'll see is that I've closed over the surrounding lexical scope, right? So at canvas there, right, was something that was defined in my enclosing lexical scope, but it's also made available inside of, this handler. It's a very natural way of programming, right? So this avoids the weird, I got to stuff something in an object and pass it as this optional parameter, right, to open read async. You'll notice that there's overloads for this thing that takes an object as a second parameter, right? So if you're using other languages that don't have closures, right, you effectively have to pass your environment, right, that you want to manipulate as that object parameter and have it flow back through the event system and show up on the other side, right? So it's a very, very nice way and a very convenient way and a very natural way of writing this kind of code. Okay. So, what else should I talk about, Jimmy?
Your kids, Thomas maybe?
You'll notice that I've got a train here, right? There's Henry the train, right, and there's the Channel 9 guy, So I accidentally had Henry the train in my pocket when I left for here for Vegas. So I've been making a point to make sure I take photos of Henry wherever I'm at, right? To make sure. So Henry's actually giving this talk today, as far as my kids are concerned. So let's go back to the slides. And what do we see here, right? We saw a bunch of things. We saw that we had some, Ruby, we had some Silverlight, we had some Visual Studio for the first time inside of this thing, and we also had some ASP.NET MVC happening as well. So this is a case where you want to adopt more of the stack, in particular some of the server-side stuff as well, right? So you can now, run all of this stuff inside of the environment. We are going to fully support Ruby inside of Visual Studio, moving forward, right? We're not there yet, right? So you will be able to debug, have syntax coloring, and a bunch of other things. If you're really itchy to like, get things going and stuff. What I didn't mention was all of that syntax coloring that you saw for Ruby, right, inside of Visual Studio wasn't done by us, right? It was actually done by the Sapphire and Steel guys, right? They have a plugin for Visual Studio called Ruby and Steel. They have a free personal edition for download for Iron Ruby, so they're building Iron Ruby support into their plugin, right? So that's where all that syntax coloring came from, or was from the Ruby and Steel guys, right? So it's a very, very nice little plugin. Our debugging support is almost there, right? We've got some more stuff to do, but we'll get that done in the next few weeks, right? So you'll have a much better debugging experience and be able to do the end-to-end thing, right? Debug on the client, debug on the server, right? Do things end-to-end, and this becomes much more real at this point in time as well. Okay, awesome. So where are we now, right? So remember the theme of the talk was all about freedom, right? The freedom to adapt as little or as much of our stack as you want in order to get your jobs done because you guys are pragmatic people, right? So, depending on which part of the stack you want, right? If obviously, right, if you're targeting folks on, Linux clients, right? Then obviously, right, Moonlight is a clear choice for you guys, right? To go off and build things. In fact, it's not even a choice that you really have to make. Right? It's really the runtime that winds up being downloaded to the user's machines. You get to choose or opt into what kind of development experience that you want, from a pure text editing experience to an integrated debugger, all singing, all dancing thing. You get to pick what language that you want to use, right? Be it the languages my team is building, Python and Ruby, right? Or JavaScript, or even other things like PHP. Right, so the Phalange project, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Phalange is a .NET implementation of PHP. But those guys already have, well, at least a hacked up version, right, of Phalange running on top of DLR, on top of Silverlight in the client. Right, so if you look around, right, you should be able to search for a demo, which is the helicopter demo, right, the infamous Phalange helicopter demo, which is a little helicopter game, and it runs in Silverlight on the client, right, all written inside using PHP. Right, so you should be able to do this stuff soon on the client as well. And then finally, you get to get your pick of what server-side thing that you want, right? Okay, so it could be, any one of those operating systems can be used to host your server side, right? So if you've got stuff existing on, the daemon or the animal, right, then, that's fine, right? You can use the Silverlight stuff and plug into that stuff, right, without having to change that. Or if you're on Windows, you can go off and use that as well. So it's really all about choice and giving you the freedom to choose and opt into which parts of the things make the most sense for the business that you're trying to run. So now we're at this. Right? So that's, of course, the tagline for Microsoft, right? Your potential, our passion. Right? And I mentioned earlier that we're doing an awful lot of stuff around open source on my team and around Microsoft in general, right, as a larger organization. Right? So if you really think about it, right, open source is kind of different than this model here, right, in the sense that, your potential, the stuff you can do with the stuff that we create, right? It's this, we build stuff and we ship it to you thing, right? But in the open source model, I would argue that it's probably the other way around, right? So it's really that, right? Our potential, right, that we can realize with shipping these platforms, right, is really the result of the passion you guys have of building open source stuff, contributing back into the community, helping us finish this kind of stuff as well, right? So I think it's a nice way of kind of thinking about, the new Microsoft. All right. So I'd like to thank you guys, for doing this. We're going to be open for questions, in a moment. This is where at least the Iron Ruby project lives, up on RubyForge. Right, so it'd be awesome if you guys could go visit us. You can download some stuff. At some point, we're going to have bits that are available on a different site, not here, but dynamicsilverlight.net, where you can get all of the stuff that, that you'll need to run the demos that we've got today. And yes, right, so, this is T28, right, the session number if you want to fill out your evals and stuff for this talk, right, just to remind you guys. And I would love to open it up for questions at this point, right, because we have 16 minutes and 25 seconds left, right? Thanks to this lovely timer. Yes. Oh, yeah, the mic would be awesome.
Hey, so the demo you did there with the Flickr and stuff, did much of that at all rely on specifically it being Ruby, or could you port those lines of code to ToyScript and run it right inside Silverlight?
There's absolutely no reason why you can't use any DLR-based language, right, inside of this stuff. Yeah, so if you wanted to use lol code or some other wacky thing like that, right? Unfortunately, we don't have a lol code demo here, right? But if we did, we could have probably, we got to add that to our list of things to do. Other questions? Yes?
That interception method, are you doing like a partial method? Is that kind of basically what's going on?
So the question is, when we did the method interception, right, were we doing some kind of partial method-y kind of thing or what? So really what's happening, right, is that interception only happens from Ruby going into the C# thing, right? So if you had some other C# thing, right, not Ruby, right, talking to the thing, you're not going to see the interception happening. So in our method binder, we will bind to our thing preferentially first, right? Because we're essentially rewriting the binding rules inside of that.
It's a Ruby feature.
Yeah.
So.
And you can do similar things in Python, right, as well, right? You can absolutely do exactly the same. Actually, no, in Python, you probably can't do that one. It's only for user-defined types. Python is just this, kind of, much more conservative language, right, than the free love language of Ruby. Thanks.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, does the Iron Python, all those things running on the server side as well? And if so, how do you do you have any metrics on performance compared with, say, the same thing running on a Linux one that doesn't use DLR?
Okay, yeah, so many questions in there. So let me break it down into several questions, right? So the first question is, can you run Ruby stuff on the server, right? And so, we'll confess, we haven't thought about what it takes to make that happen yet, right? It's in our plans, right? We absolutely intend to allow you to use, any of our dynamic languages to build, server-side ASP.NET or ASP.NET MVC applications, right? How that looks like and what shape that's going to look like is still to be decided yet, right? It's a lot. We were a really small team, right? So, getting this stuff working in the language and all that other stuff, that's been a real challenge. But we'll definitely, that's on our list of things to do. Second question you asked is a performance question, I believe. And I guess you're asking us to compare performance to...
Well, I was hoping that, you would compare performance, of the same code that's running, on top of DLR versus, some other, native Ruby or...
versus C Ruby or native Ruby. So we've been doing the benchmark dog and pony show, right? So there's nothing worse than lies, there's lies, damn lies, and benchmarks, right? And so the challenge is that we're faster, right, on the benchmarks that we look at, right? So that's the good news. The bad news is we're getting worse over time, but that's because we're adding features to the language. So we've done exactly 0 performance tuning today, right, outside of whatever work's being done in the DLR already, right, to achieve our current performance, which is better than C Ruby, on the set of benchmarks that we are looking at, right? So, right, which is the standard set of benchmarks that the Ruby community uses, which is actually the same set of benchmarks that is used to benchmark YARV, right, which is the Ruby 1.9 runtime, which is their own virtual machine implementation. Using the same set of benchmarks, and we're faster than existing C Ruby. So over time, we're going to actually spend some time focusing on performance, but we really need to finish the language first before we really worry much more about the performance, right? Because one of the key goals of Iron Ruby is to run real Ruby programs. And in order to make that happen, we've got to finish the language, make sure it's compatible. Then we're going to focus our attention on performance. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we know about that we can fix.
Thanks.
Thanks. More questions. We got 12 minutes and 31 seconds left.
If you were using the Mac as a development platform, and could you, I guess through Mona or whatever, could you actually set up the test to run on the dev box from us using the whole Silverlight? And because the way that this app was created, with everything you're showing today, I know you're showing everything, so you got JavaScript and Python. But if you were like, say, just use Ruby, could you actually do like the TDD whole process and get all the tests in there and would it run on a Mac, or would you need to use Windows as your development box to really get the full benefit of testing? Okay, so that's a really good question. There's this. So Sean Burke's team shipped this thing called the Silverlight Controls Toolkit 2 days ago, right, along with all the other stuff that went out the door. And so the Silverlight Controls Toolkit has a really nice testing framework inside of it, right? So Sean's really hot on doing TDD as a thing, right, and making testing this emphasis, right? Making sure that we don't have our tests coupled to some crazy Microsoft thing, right? But instead, right, our tests can run independently inside of the browser, and so that's the test suite that ships with the Silverlight Controls Toolkit that is used to test the controls themselves, right? And they've had excellent success in being able to build that thing in a very short amount of time, right? Using that test suite. So that test suite is available to you, as well as the framework that runs that test suite. Okay. Now, the downside of how things are around that right now is, back to the Mac question. It probably, I don't know, like it should. I don't know if it works because I haven't tried it on a Mac, right? In theory, there's nothing that should prevent it from working on a Mac, right? So there's just, I would go off and try that thing out. If you have problems, right, send me email and I'll route it to the right folks that can help you out there. Right, but it's absolutely our intent to make sure that things will work, on par on both sides. More questions?
You guys are shy.
Can you can you elaborate a little bit on Chiron, how you get it, what the license is,
Fantastic. So I could let Jimmy answer this question.
Whoa, I get to speak.
Sorry.
So the people who built that, right? John Mesterly is somewhere in his hotel room right now, packaging up all of the stuff you've seen today and pushing it out to dynamicsilverlight.net. Right. So John's blog, my blog. Once that's out there, we'll let you know. So the question was, what's Chiron? What's the license? Right. So again, Chiron just this local little HTTP listener, web server, if you will, but it only works for development scenarios. We're shipping the source code as well. Right, it's MSPL, right, the public license. So you'll be able to play with it.
Change it, extend it, hack it,
exactly.
do whatever you want, sell it, right?
If you hate what we did, you can change it. Right? And it's the same thing for all the code, the shim that connects Silverlight to the DLR is also going to be MSPL'd, right? So you can take that, you can change that. So same stuff, and that'll be available, hopefully a little bit later today, and we'll blog about it.
Yeah, because it's actually easier, right, to fire nuclear missiles, right, than it is to sign code in Microsoft, right? Because the last time I see in the movies, right, you know how in a submarine, how you have to have like the two guys with the keys that are, separated by like 10 feet or whatever it is, right? So one guy can't do both, right? Well, we need 3 guys to sign code, right, at Microsoft. So that's a result of some of the delays that we're seeing right now. Is you got to find the 3 guys, right, that can authorize the signing of stuff. So.
Yeah. However, so today you can download off Dynamic Silverlight the hands-on lab that we have going on, and that has Ruby bits and Silverlight bits and has Chiron. So if you want to play with that, that's fine. That's like kind of a little pre-release thing, so to hold you over until we ship the real stuff, right? So.
Awesome. More questions? We are down to 8 minutes and 29 seconds. Plenty of time. Yes, great.
What's the status of supporting some of the Ruby gems?
Great question. So, and the Iron Ruby side of the house, we've been running on a conference-driven development schedule, right? So,
so this is a milestone.
Yeah, this is a milestone, right? And so, in our conference-driven development schedule, the next major conference on our roadmap is RailsConf at the end of May. And the goal is to have Hello World, right, or hopefully more than Hello World, working on Rails, right, by RailsConf. And what we've now done is we're now switching our development process over to one where we have a very specific goal, right? Because initially it says, yeah, we got to get a bunch of libraries working. Okay, fine, but that's not a very focused way of getting stuff to work, right? Finishing everything isn't necessary to run Hello World. Right, so instead what we've done is we've done a bunch of dynamic profiling. So we've hacked up CRuby itself, right, so that we get a better hook than set debug proc, trace proc, right, that's in there now. And so using our better hook, we're tracing all method calls into C-based APIs, and we're logging all of these things. We've run those things on every scenario that we care to hit. One of our first ones is gem install foo, right? So once we got gem install foo working, we've got about a list of about 180 C-based APIs that we have to implement. And we're just knocking those things down, off on the list, and with the help of folks out there. And then, so discussions are well underway on our mailing list about exactly how that work's being divvied up. And so the goal is to get that thing to work. Herb's the next thing because we need one more language feature to get Herb working. And then after that, we're going to start looking at, getting, Hello World Rails working as well. Right? But we've got this very nice list of things that we've got to hit in order to make that happen. So I don't know if that answers your precise, but at least gem install foo, where foo is hopefully something trivial, right? It's going to work. But then, there's the larger question of just being able to run arbitrary gems, right? Now, running arbitrary gems is going to be hard, right? Because a lot of gems contain C libraries, right? And that's not going to work, right? So any pure Ruby gem should just run, right? Inside of our thing, modulo bugs, right? So if it doesn't run, then it's a bug, and you can open it, and we'll fix it.
Is it working with just gem unpack right now fairly well?
No, so I can show you. We can talk offline about the list of things that we need to implement, right? But I've got this very detailed list of things, and so some of the stuff is around zip support or zlib support and that kind of stuff, and so we got to get those libraries working as well.
One different question.
Sure.
Is there any support, or is it coming for Ruby style of breakpoints, where you just say breakpoint in the code or a debugger or something like that, and it drops into IRB? So the breakpointer stuff, that should just work, right? Once we get our language done, right? So we will definitely support both styles of debugging, right? Be it the kind of the stuff by setting the debug hooks inside of Ruby itself, right, versus the other thing.
So again, IRB is a Ruby program, right? And so is the debugger, right, that comes with it. So the idea is that if we have real Ruby, we will run IRB, right? So be able to run IRB and have it point to Iron Ruby instead of real Ruby. And the idea is also that the debugging stuff would just come out. But again, we're not near that yet. So
Thanks.
Cool, thanks. More questions?
So if you want to run Chiron, and let's say you want your server side to be Rails or Django or whatever random web server technology you build in, could you wire up Chiron to run inside the app, or would it just be a separate thing you would need to use for now? Or?
You would have to write your own handler in that case, right? So you'd have to write something on top of whatever web server you're using, right, to spit out stuff in Rails. So since you've got the source code for Chiron, right, you'll see exactly how we do this stuff.
So I've been hacking around with getting our stuff running in Rails, right? And I can talk to you after about how I'm doing that. But yeah, it's definitely possible. So we can talk about that.
No more questions. You guys are hungry, right? You want to go off and get some lunch. So
I know I'm hungry.
So if you have no more questions, let's just call it.